Hi, welcome to Identifying Bodies with Dead Jim and me. I'm Sarah. That's me. Now imagine you're just walking through the park, minding your own business, when a skeleton appears in all of its glory. What do we do? Ah! Do not worry, friend. We will identify the body before we call the police. Does he have an ID, or a wallet, or a phone? No, he is a skeleton. So how do we identify him?
Identifying bodies is possibly the most essential part of forensics. What's forensics, you ask? Forensics, in short, is the application of science to law. The most common branch of forensics is forensic anthropology, which is basically studying bodies, like this one here. The first step into identifying a body based on bones are to determine if they are A, actual bones, and B, human bones. The next and more specific steps are to determine the victim's age, sex, race, and stature. These are known as the Big Four of identifying bodies. Now obviously Dead Jim isn't made of real bone, but let's assume that he's a real skeleton hanging here right next to me. We can assume with relative certainty that Dead Jim's a human because of the amount of bones here, and the bones such as the skull and the pelvis are quite distinctive. The next step is to identify sex. Two important characteristics between biological males and females are the pelvis and the brow ridge. As you can see here, on the male skull, the brow ridge is very prominent, while on the female skull there is a smooth transition between the forehead and the tip of the nose. If we look on DJ, we can see that there is a very prominent bulge on his glabella, and this indicates that he is a male. Obviously, the most definite way of determining the sex of a victim is to examine their genitalia, but since we are only working with skeleton, we have to use the pelvis. However, the pelvis is still an excellent indicator of sex. Since ladies gotta pump out babies, they have a wider pelvic opening in order for a baby to fit through. In addition, there's sacrum and coccyx, which are these two bones right here. They make up the tailbone, are tilted back towards the posterior of the body. Males don't have to do this, and so their sacrum and coccyx are tilted towards the anterior or front of the body. The ischia and iliacs on a female are spread wider for this same reason. If we think of the pelvis as a butterfly, the ischia is the bottom wings, and the iliacs are the top wings. And just like Shakira, the hips don't lie. Females have a lot sharper and more pronounced hip bones or iliacs than in males. If you look on Dead Jim, we can see that his sacrum and coccyx are tilted forward, and the gap between his butterfly wings is very narrow. Also, he has rounded iliacs. All these point towards Dead Jim being a male. First, we need to determine whether or not Jim is an adult. Obviously, he doesn't pay taxes or drive, freeloader, so we have to look at his bones. We can look at the degree of fusion on Jim's bones and determine that Jim is indeed an adult. However, this isn't specific enough. For this, we need to look at the sutures on his cranium. A suture is essentially a seam between two bones. As we get older, the sutures fuse together to form one complete solid bone. If we look on Jim, we can see that his cranium is a complete structure, though his sutures are not completely fused. Therefore, we can put Jim's age in the range of his early 20s to mid-30s. The next step is to determine Jim's race. In physical anthropology, there are three main races: Caucasian, Sub-Saharan African, and Mongoloid. The Mongoloid race encompasses East Asians and American Indians as well. To determine race, we look at the teeth, nose, and the mastoid process. Since Jim doesn't have a lower jaw, we can look at his teeth relatively easily. Caucasians and Sub-Saharan Africans tend to have flat incisors or front teeth, while Mongoloids tend to have curved shovel-shaped incisors. Caucasians tend to have smaller teeth with more crowding and are prone to overbites, while Sub-Saharan Africans have larger teeth that are less crowded, though their upper teeth tend to jut out more towards the front of the body. Mongoloids often have calcium deposits inside of their teeth, which can make them weak and prone to cracking. The nose is also a prominent indicator of race. Caucasians tend to have longer, thinner noses, so the nasal bridge is high and sharp. On the other end, Sub-Saharan Africans tend to have short, wide noses, so the nasal bridge is low and wide. Mongoloids make a happy medium between the two. Another indicator of race is the mastoid process, which is this lump right here underneath the ear. The mastoid process is wide in Sub-Saharan Africans and sharp in Caucasian males. For Mongoloids, a smaller lump forms on the already small lump, lumpception. Since Jim has flat incisors, smaller teeth, a high nasal bridge, and a sharp mastoid process, we can confirm that he is a Caucasian. To recap, the questions to go through when identifying a victim based on solely bones are they actually bones? Are they human bones? Is the victim a male or a female? How old is the victim? And what is the race of the victim? Happy crime fighting!